Imagine the world ending. What would you do? Lot's daughters felt deep sadness and pessimism after Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction. They believed they were the last of humanity when hope was lost and despair ruled. This catastrophic event led to a decision that defies explanation and has lasting moral repercussions. Could it have been desperation? Or did it reveal their Sodom-era corruption? The ghosts of Sodom's corrupted ways haunt nations and people throughout history, showing the devastating effects of moral decay. Lot, a man of faith, was rich and abundant, but one must consider the cost. His family fled Sodom and Gomorrah as the towns burned, but their corruption persisted. His daughter's extraordinary decisions set the stage for a tale of strife, transgression, and discontent that would last. What can be learned from this sad story? Join us as we discover the lasting truths of this intriguing narrative and the enormous ramifications of this sin for humanity. The story of Lot's daughters is one of the most distressing in the Bible. It asks us to consider morality, survival, and the lasting effects of living in a corrupt world. After Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, Lot and his family wandered the world, believing the end of days had arrived. In a stunning display of his power, the cities they once loved were now blazing ruins. In reaction to those communities' rampant depravity and moral degradation, the heavenly decree decreed its fate. Sodom and Gomorrah were once thriving cities full of wealth and extravagance. At that time, the area was well-watered, like the garden of the Lord. Trade and culture flourished there. In the past, visitors and merchants from faraway nations came to these busy towns for wealth and grandeur. However, a darkness so deep drowned all wonderful things beneath the wealth and splendor. What was once a place of peace and unity had become a breeding ground for greed, injustice, and vice. The ancient Sodomites became lost in their quest for wealth and luxury, turning away from the divine teachings. The people are hauntingly portrayed in the sacred text as wicked and their crimes huge and grievous to the Almighty. Pride and extravagance were celebrated in the metropolis, but the destitute were neglected. In a nation where the wealthy reveled in their bountiful crops, the cries of the hungry and weary remained unheard, akin to a faint murmur in the breeze. Sodom's sin was not just the pursuit of money or pleasure, but also the utter rejection of moral responsibility, heart corruption, and disrespect for society's founding ideals. The moral decline of these cities is linked to Lot and his family. Lot made a life-changing decision after coming from a godly family. After bidding farewell to his uncle Abraham, Lot aimed for the fertile plains of Jordan, brimming with opportunities. He bravely entered Sodom's heart and joined its vibrant life. He gained respect and power at the city gate, where elders and judges congregated. Lot may have imagined he could keep his religion in a sinful city. He became further entangled in the world as the days went on. He transformed from an outsider into an integral part of Sodom's daily life, actively participating in its moral decline. It shows how easily one may be swayed by their circumstances, regardless of their convictions. Eventually, Lot compromised morally, but the consequences were devastating. Lot faced a grave moral dilemma as Sodom's wickedness increased. He found himself in a chaotic situation as two celestial beings descended upon the city. But instead of a cordial greeting, a frenzied throng of men demanded Lot give them for their wicked wants. Lot's desperate decision to give his children to the mob to safeguard his visitors was heartbreaking. This illustrates how low Lot fell. In a touching moment, It shows his moral compass changing in a city where good and wrong are blurred. Sodom's sin culminated in that moment. Angels blinded the mob to save Lot and his family. However, the city's destruction was imminent, and the Almighty's will was unchangeable. Time had arrived for Sodom, and its fate was sealed. As fire and brimstone were about to destroy the city, Lot held on to hope. The angels advised him to flee with his wife and daughters, without looking back. They were ordered to flee the imminent judgment. Lot hesitated despite the need. He was devoted to the city and the wealth and safety he had built there. It depicts the heartbreaking effort to let go of things while knowing their fate. As the angels took his hand and brought him out, the family was released. Unbeknownst to them, their worst chapter was ahead. Lot's decision to live in Sodom changed his life and his family's. After Abraham left, Lot had to choose between comfort and spiritual protection, a familiar choice. The Jordan Valley farmland promised ease, prosperity, and success. In a period when money sometimes trumped justice, Lot was drawn to the beautiful, fertile land that seemed to offer everything the heart could want. Many wise people caution us that what we perceive may not be the truth. Lot chose this prosperous region, but he ignored the spiritual dangers ahead, according to the ancient legend. Though he moved to Sodom, he totally blended into the city and became revered. Lot once stood at the city entrance, where elders and judges convened and had considerable power. He had reached grandeur, so this seemed like victory. However, his elevation made him vulnerable to his peers' moral degradation. Ancient Sodom, known for its wealth and grandeur, ignored the sacred truths that guided many. Despite luxury, a transgressive community existed. In Sodom, the immorality of the people was woven into their lives, preventing repentance. The citizens of the city were selfish and committed many terrible acts. Prosperity in Sodom was linked to greed, conceit, and excess. Despite their riches, citizens ignored the poor and needy. Lot frequently had to decide whether to live easily or to follow his ideals. He may have thought he could uphold his morals while enjoying Sodom's riches, but he was wrong. Lot's story illustrates how one's environment may influence decisions and character. Lot, a righteous man, became enmeshed in Sodom's evil culture. Lot's actions show his internal conflict when two angels warned him of the city's destruction. He opened his doors to the tired visitors as a show of faith to protect them from the darkness in the city's shadows, where persons with ill intentions wanted to hurt them. As the citizens of Sodom surrounded his home, demanding the angels for their filthy purposes, Lot desperately offered his daughters as a substitute. This compelling and shocking argument shows his extreme ethical degradation, and living in such immorality had impaired his perception. The angels descended, blinding the wicked, but the Almighty's sentence was already in effect. In ancient times, Sodom and Gomorrah faced a critical decision. The crime was so great that destruction was inevitable. God gave the city plenty of chances to repent, but the people refused. Lot and his family were the only survivors, but their flight was difficult. His uncertainty when the divine messengers told Lot to leave without looking back indicated more than words could tell. Lot clung to Sodom's comforts as judgment loomed. Only after the angels guided him away from the city did he find safety. Lot's reluctance shows how we create deep attachments with material things, even when we know we should let go. It shows that supernatural intervention is sometimes needed to free us from our history. Lot's future was forever changed by this moment of doubt and his wife's fatal decision to look back and become a pillar of salt. He fled Sodom's burning fate, but his decisions and their consequences would haunt him and his family forever. Even with the urgent heavenly message, Lot's reluctance to leave Sodom is a compelling and introspective point in this narrative. It was like his heart was tied to the city that had become his second home. Though the angels told Lot to go, Lot stood at the ruinous spot. At a crucial moment when life is at stake, what would make someone pause? The scriptures don't explain Lot's hesitancy, but one may imagine his inner turmoil. He lived a comfortable, secure life in Sodom. He chose this city for its abundance and promise, without considering the ethical cost. Sodom became his home, source of food, and place of honor throughout time. His position at the city gate indicated his importance. Forsaking his comforts and esteem must have felt like a great sadness, a cutting away from all that was known. Lot may have hoped to rescue something from Sodom's ruins. He may have thought the city still had hope, or that staying longer would prevent the judgment. We often settle into a familiar place or situation on our travels, despite our inner voices warning against it. Lot's pause shows that we all struggle to accept change, even when it's good. He was called to relinquish the baggage of the past, which is never easy when it is so deeply ingrained in him. Even more impressive, the angels didn't leave him alone. They left him little time to think or decide. They grasped his hand and guided him out of the city quickly, emphasizing the importance of the situation. Lot was unable to see the route ahead, so they guided him to safety. This act resonates. At times when we don't fully realize the weight of our circumstances, when we're caught in yesterday's chains or our own fears, the divine hand guides us to refuge and regeneration. Lot's pause symbolizes spiritual stagnation. How often do we, like Lot, stop letting go of sinful habits or surroundings? Even if they are toxic, we cling to them for comfort or familiarity. Lot's heavenly command to flee without looking back went beyond physical departure. It was a turning point, a rupture from the past to boldly enter the future. Lot's reluctance reveals human nature's complexity. It goes beyond following or straying from the path. Heart and mind transformation can be harder than deeds when following the divine way. It emphasizes giving up our own understanding to receive heavenly insight. It symbolizes faith, reminding us that even in the midst of enormous challenges, the route ahead leads to true sanctuary. While leading Lot from the city, the angels guided him away from doom. But the story continues. Lot's wife hesitated and turned her back, disregarding the angels' clear instructions. That instant, she became a salt pillar. Her destiny shows the dangers of looking back at a past the Almighty has judged. It symbolizes the spiritual peril of hanging on to the old methods and life after being offered the chance to quit it. Lot's journey from Sodom to freedom, growth, and faith in divine guidance despite uncertainty is a profound spiritual journey. Lots of uncertainty warns us all. Our attachment to the past, reluctance to change, and skepticism can cloud our view and delay redemption. As Lot realized, divine guidance can lead us to safety if we let go and follow the road. The corrupt practices of Sodom had a profound impact on Lot's daughter's ideas and deeds. In a world where right and wrong were so blurred, they saw their perilous situation through the flawed thinking that had formed their lives from the start. In times of disaster and pessimism, they chose practicality over spiritual purpose. Their desperate choice was a vivid expression of Sodom's moral degradation and a response to their era's challenges. Imagine their childhood environment. Morality had collapsed in Sodom, leaving a barren wasteland. Compassion, charity, and justice were few when people were consumed by their own ambitions, greed, and pride. Many years ago, family, respect, and virtue seemed remote and unknown. Instead, they were shaped by a society where luxury and wealth ruled, and morality and vice were blurred. This realm was all Lot's daughters knew. On a distant planet, morality was a whisper, righteousness was hidden in shadows, and life and bonds were often neglected. They faced the unfathomable here. They felt dreadful as they stood alone in the mountains that fateful day. They were afraid and depressed because they believed they were the last survivors of a divinely destroyed planet. They lost all they loved: Sodom, their birthplace, their dreams of a future, and their familiar lifestyles. The question of what next seemed frightening. They feared their extinction was inevitable, without husbands continuing on their family line. Deep in their hearts, terror fueled by the primitive instinct to survive guided them on a sad journey. Their response? Their answer was to have children with Lot. The act was not just morally wrong. It sprang from a deeply distorted view of what one must do to survive in this world. In their struggle, they saw their world destroyed and made preserving their bloodline their top priority at any cost. In their greatest need, they took comfort in believing their deeds were justified by their sufferings. They began to justify their wrongdoing in their hearts, believing it was vital to survive imminent disaster. This option was not just practical. It indicated the darkness that had crept into their spirits, revealing how deeply Sodom's depravity had taken root in them. In Sodom, extravagance reigned, passions were unrestrained, and pleasure trumped all else. Here, life and family were twisted and ruined, creating a lost civilization. In a place with echoes of the past, the daughters began to imitate the deeds they had seen throughout their lives. Intoxication was used to keep Lot from knowing what was happening. The elder daughter joined him first, then the younger daughter followed the next day. The sacred text shows that Lot was unaware of the deeds around him, making him an unintentional participant. What does this show? Not only the physical act, but also these women's terrible spiritual and emotional degradation counts. They found themselves at a juncture where the distinction between good and evil had become hazy. They were so used to Sodom's evil that their sins seemed insignificant. They no longer trusted God's plan or His counsel for survival. Instead, they took charge of their fate, using the same erroneous thinking that had initially brought down their beloved city. This touching story shows how our environment shapes our beliefs and choices. Lot's daughters were raised in a culture that had abandoned God's ways, unable to distinguish righteousness from sin. They took risks that would change their lives and nations in their fear. They produced Moab and Ben-Ami, the Moabites and Ammonites, two nations that would fight Israel in the ancient narratives. In this story, the daughters' choices may be judged quickly. It's important to remember that they came from their surroundings. They were raised where survival was vital, right and wrong were meaningless, and goals justified means. In their desperation, they slipped into the same filth that had brought down Sodom. Their story illustrates the dangers of a polluted world and its long-term impact on morality. It shows that our surroundings and influences shape our choices. No doubt Lot's daughters were victims, yet they also contributed to their moral decline. Let us consider their acts, which are potent reminders. They advise us to guard our hearts and thoughts and seek heavenly guidance, especially in times of doubt and anxiety. Moab and Ben-Ami emerged from a fortuitous encounter, starting a long and difficult life. Two children from Lot's daughter's sad story would become the parents of countries that would forever shape Israel's history. Their story is more than a fleeting mention in religious writings. It has compelling turns, challenges, and a timeless lesson. Moab, Lot's oldest daughter's son, founded the Moabite nation. Moabites flourished early on, retaining their individuality. However, they fell into a cycle of moral and spiritual deterioration, mirroring the civilization that had given them life. The Moabites worshipped Chemosh, a pagan god associated with child sacrifice, according to the sacred writings. This deed distinguished them as a corrupt community. They maintained a life of oppression, brutality, and rejection of God. The Old Testament portrays the Moabites as Israel's constant opponent. They didn't settle for solitude. They tried to stop Israel's progress. In a fascinating ancient story, Balak, king of Moab, hired Balaam to curse Israel. Balak saw Israel as a powerful enemy and wanted to defeat them with supernatural forces. Balaam, a foreign prophet, was unable to fulfill Balak's wishes when God intervened. When Balaam cursed Israel, his words became blessings. Indeed, the Almighty shielded Israel from the Moabites, who tried to destroy them, but failed. Balaam prophesied of a powerful Israelite monarch, a messianic reference to Jesus Christ. Israel's victory over its enemies proves that those God favors cannot be cursed. In addition to spiritual warfare, the Moabites fought Israel militarily. In the past, Moab's kings would gather their forces to fight Israel as its might grew. With relentless pursuit, they wanted to weaken Israel. Judges recount Israel's suffering under the harshness and violence of Moabite king Eglon. At a crucial time, Ehud, a judge who used his left hand skillfully, saved Israel and defeated the Moabites. As Lot's younger daughter's descendants, the Ammonites were doomed to a similar fate. They ended themselves north of the Moabites, but suffered the same spiritual and moral decline. In Ammonite culture, Milcom was dreaded for his insatiable need for human sacrifices, especially of infants. This harsh habit made them one of Israel's most despised nations. The sacred books strongly condemn their idolatry, and their culture's harshness only deepened Israel's hatred of them. Like the Moabite neighbors, the Ammonites fought Israel many times. King Saul's early reign included a major struggle. Nahash, the terrible Ammonite monarch, besieged Jabesh-Gilead, terrifying its people. Nahash gave the people a terrible choice: submit or lose their right eye. This cruel act would weaken them in warfare. Jabesh-Gilead leaders sent messengers to Saul, who had been anointed king, in a time of need. After hearing Jabesh-Gilead's desperate cry, Saul was moved by God. Saul rallied his warriors and launched a surprise attack on Nahash's troops. The Ammonites lost, and the city was freed. This victory cemented Saul's rule as king and marked Israel's first military success under him. Despite these victories, the Ammonites would trouble Israel. They fought often to establish dominance. The Ammonites were hostile to Israel, but like the Moabites, they sometimes allied with Israel. The Moabites and Ammonites story revealed a deep truth. Origins do not determine fate. Though they started morally problematic, these nations were allowed to shape their own fates. They repeatedly reverted to their ancestors' sins, causing conflict with Israel and ultimately with God. Moab and Ammon are stark reminders of the consequences of breaking the divine moral code in the grand story of the Scriptures. Their stories remind us that sin may be passed down through generations. In a story of terror and desperation, Lot's daughters created two nations that would cause Israel perpetual conflict. Their legacy reminds us of the dangers of moral compromise, the allure of ignoring heavenly counsel, for practical solutions and the lasting effects of sin. Moab and Ammon, Lot's daughter's sons, were born long ago. This started a legacy that would shape Israel's history. They were born into two nations that would play a major role in the sacred text's epic story after a sad and unethical family affair. The Moabites and Ammonites symbolized how sin, selfishness, and disobedience shape civilizations. The Moabites, descendants of Lot's elder daughter, lived in a lush, promising area east of the Jordan River. They found treasures in a fertile land and prospered. Despite their abundance, they forsook the Lord. The Moabites were noted for their devotion to pagan deities, especially Chemosh, who was tied to child sacrifice. This was more than mere worship. It challenged the heavenly commandments against such filthy conduct. The Moabites' relationship with Israel is convoluted and full of hatred. Balak of Moab wanted to weaken Israel in the past. Balak asked Balaam, a prophet skilled in cursing and blessing, to curse Israel out of concern about their growing might. Yet God intervened. Balaam could not curse the Lord's chosen people despite his wealth. He was motivated by the supernatural to bless Israel every time he tried. Balaam predicted the Messiah, Jesus Christ, by describing a powerful king from Israel. The Moabites defied Israel despite divine counsel. The Moabites oppressed Israel for 18 years under judges, forcing them into servitude. When Israel needed a leader, Judge Ehud led them to fight the Moabites. As the Moabites and Israelites fought throughout history, the story continued. As descendants of Lot's younger daughter, the Ammonites resembled their cousins, the Moabites. They settled north of Moab and east of the Jordan River. In ancient times, the Ammonites worshipped idols, and Milcom, Moloch, was their greatest deity. Milcom wanted child sacrifices, another direct assault on God's morality. Like the Moabites, the Ammonites' crimes were so severe that they irritated Israel. The Ammonites and Israel fought a major battle early in King Saul's reign. The Ammonite king Nahash besieged Jabesh-Gilead in ancient times. He gave the people a hard choice: surrender or lose their right eyes, as a sign of submission. Since a warrior needs both eyes to fight, this humiliation attempted to weaken Israel's military. In need, the elders of Jabesh-Gilead approached Saul, the newly crowned king. After hearing this, the Spirit of God incited Saul to righteously anger the Ammonites for their brutality. Saul surprised Nahash with a 330,000-man army. Israel triumphed, scattering the Ammonites and ending their siege. This victory freed Jabesh-Gilead's people and strengthened Saul's rule. It was a turning point in Israel's story, showing that God supported them and would help them win. The story shows how God may use chosen leaders like Saul to fulfill his divine purpose despite great adversity. A cordial relationship between Israel and the Ammonites was not to last. The Ammonites, like the Moabites, fought Israel in the past. Their constant hostility and vile behavior deepened the distance between them and the Lord's chosen. In later chapters of Israel's trip, the Ammonites fought the people and tried to stop the godly dominion from growing. Despite these struggles, the Moabites and Ammonites contrast with Israel's divine calling. Israel was called to shine brilliantly among the nations, displaying the wisdom of the one true God and his righteous paths. Instead, the Moabites and Ammonites embraced idolatry, bloodshed, and corruption. A timeless fable warns us that sinful and defiant choices lead to catastrophe, affecting not only individuals, but also civilizations. The relationship between Israel and these two states is intricately entwined with history. The Moabites and Ammonites sometimes gave the Israelites refuge throughout their wars. When hunger hit Israel, Naomi and her family fled to Moab to survive. Ironically, Ruth, one of the most pious women in Scripture, was from Moab. Ruth was devoted enough to travel back to Israel with her mother-in-law, Naomi. This fateful choice led her to marry Boaz and become King David's great-grandmother and Jesus Christ's ancestor. Ruth's place in Christ's lineage is a powerful reminder that one's starting point does not dictate their destination. The Moabites and Ammonites were descended from a wicked act, yet their people could make decisions that changed their lives and history. Ruth's tale shows how God can redeem anybody, regardless of their history. The Moabites and Ammonites story teaches us that our choices last. Despite their desperate attempt to preserve their lineage, Lot's daughter's choices led to the establishment of two countries that would oppose God's people for decades. It is a heartbreaking reminder that sin, even when concealed and alone, can have far-reaching effects. Our choices affect our path and future generations. The Moabites and Ammonites symbolized disobedience, idolatry, and war against Israel. Their story also shows redemption and the power of choices to change lives. It is a strong reminder that God's grace surpasses our deepest sins. Our present choices shape our legacy. The story of Lot's daughter's catastrophic choice shows how moral deterioration has lasting effects. Their actions shaped generations and nations. This story is not just about endurance, but about the consequences of living in a culture where injustice and moral decay are allowed, because it is the majority approach. We must understand Sodom's significant impact on their perspective as we continue their story. Sodom's culture valued extravagance. Greed, conceit, and selfishness distorted moral boundaries beyond recognition. Undoubtedly, such an environment had an impact. Lot and his family fled Sodom's burning city, but its evil haunted them. Lot's daughters matured in a city where morality was muddled. Every day they saw injustice, virtue twisting, and bloodshed. In their troubled hearts, what appeared unimaginable in a holy community, like their choices, became possible. They were in a condition of tremendous uncertainty after losing their home, city, and way of life. They made a heartbreaking decision in a moment of fear and sadness, believing that only an inconceivable union with their father could preserve their bloodline. There is a profound truth beneath the surface that demands our attention. Their choice wasn't just survival or desperation. Long years of moral decay had harmed their very selves. It's easy to criticize their actions, but their attitude resembled Sodom's. They justified their sins as rational, even though they were against God's will. As we consider their choice, we realize that sin is not always instantaneous. It frequently starts as a whisper and steadily moves into the heart until it finds a home and becomes familiar. See Lot's daughters' sad tale. They were too engulfed in Sodom's culture to see beyond it. Even after the city was destroyed and they fled to the mountains, their principles remained. This episode warns against becoming complacent in a sinful world. Lot's family left Sodom's burning, but their souls and minds were burned by spiritual and moral fires. Thus, the sacred scripture advocates vigilant heart and mind protection. Lot's daughters were physically secure, but their hearts were still corrupted. In their hearts, they felt alone in a huge world, compelled to embrace the rotten ways of their youth. Getting their father intoxicated was a terrible thing to do. It shows how far Sodom's moral depravity has sunk the daughters. They exploited their father's sleep by weaving a web of deceit and betrayal in a dark hour. This was a terrible distortion of the fundamental bonds between parents and children, not just a mistake. The story continues. What happened next shaped the Moabites and Ammonites. Children from this incestuous act would become patriarchs of various nations, and their descendants would be crucial to the biblical narrative. The Moabites and Ammonites would constantly threaten Israel. This terrifying scene shows how one generation's sin may affect future generations. Lot's daughter's heritage is entwined into Israel's continuous disputes with these two nations. Their story illustrates the consequences of a morally deteriorating life and how it can affect one's choices. The daughters of Lot struggled to escape Sodom's influence, even in the wilderness. They carried the city's misdeeds, showing how quickly moral deterioration can permeate all facets of life, even when one believes they are behaving out of necessity. This biblical story encourages us to analyze our lives and surroundings. Are we letting world ideals permeate our hearts and thoughts, changing our morality? The story of Lot's daughters reminds us that our actions and hearts affect and erode morality. It's a somber reminder that while we may avoid physical danger or struggle, internal corruption can subtly impact our choices. Lot's daughters' misery was not simply sleeping with their father, but how Sodom had corrupted them so much that they couldn't see another path. They became captivated by the society that had shaped their lives while trying to escape its destruction. Their story is a striking reminder that the decisions we make, especially in our darkest hours, shape our futures and those of our descendants. As we consider Lot and his daughters, we see how complex human decisions are and how they affect ourselves and future generations. One can dismiss Lot's story as a moral cliché. However, closer inspection reveals a timeless truth. Comfort, material gain, and societal approval over righteous behavior still tempt us today. Lot's reluctance to leave Sodom, his tragic loss, and his daughter's troubling deeds show how much a corrupt environment may influence our thoughts and actions. One important lesson is that our surroundings and decisions are inextricably linked. Our culture influences us whether we recognize it or not. Sodom's moral degradation persisted through Lot's bloodline, influencing future nations' growth and collapse. This story asks us to consider how our surroundings affect our ideas, decisions, and legacy. I want you to reflect on your path while you watch this video. Have worldly values influenced you more than divine principles? Could your decisions now affect future generations? The path of least resistance may appear tempting, but true transformation begins when we reject society's expectations and follow higher truths. Let's not dismiss Lot's story. May it motivate us to move forward. Ask tough questions, evaluate your views, and choose wisely today to honor your inner truth and legacy.